You know, for most people in the West, in the lower class or the working class, etc., you get bills in the mail. Or anyway, you used to get bills in the mail. I suppose now it's all online. But anyway, we used to get bills in the mail, and of course, we would just discard them whenever we would get a bill because we know what we can pay and when we can pay it, and that had nothing to do with what they were demanding. You know, they didn't have any resemblance to one another. What they wanted and what we had were two entirely different things. So you don't even open the bills when they come to you. The only bills that you would open were the ones that were stamped final notice, because that meant that something was going to get cut off. You know, the lights, the heat, the phone, whatever. So all of the bills up until the final notice bill were just telling you that you still had some time left before you absolutely had to pay something. And then when the final notice bill comes, then that's when you start negotiating. You know, what's the minimum that I can pay to avoid a shutdown of some service? So this is how it works. It doesn't matter if the slogan is Free Palestine or Ceasefire Now or what have you. These types of chants or protest calls have an inherent weakness because they are essentially requests. They're requests being made to whoever is actually denying the request. So when you say Free Palestine, for example, you're not addressing the liberators of Palestine, you're addressing the oppressors of Palestine. When you say ceasefire now, you're not talking to anyone except for the ones who are denying or who are rejecting the ceasefire. You're addressing the ones who are doing the killing. So when you're doing that, and you're putting it that way, requesting in that way, you are implicitly admitting that you're relying on them being magnanimous. You're affirming the relative power disparity between you and them. In other words, they have the power and you don't. You know, so just please be nice and allow this thing that we're asking for. That's what you're doing. It affirms power. It affirms their power and your subjection. Anytime that you are making a request for power, whether it is Free Palestine, Ceasefire Now, or Stop Genocide, or anything of that sort, it's going to fall on deaf ears because it's a question mark. If you want to turn it into an exclamation point, then you have to tag another phrase at the end of your slogan. There's two words that you have to add, and those two words are the only thing that will make them listen. And those two words are or else. Free Palestine or else. Ceasefire now or else. End genocide now or else. If there is no or else, then you can't get anybody's attention. You have to send them the final notice, the cutoff notice. Everything you say without an or else just tells power that they have time left to delay dealing with you, just like you do with your bill collectors. When the bill says final notice, then that means pay or else. And that's the one that you pay attention to. And the same applies to power. So the first thing that you need to do, really, is figure out what your or else option is. And in my opinion, if you have an or else option, then you should just go right to it. Like the Article 6 campaign. This is a campaign specifically to impose the or else. This is the or else of ceasefire now, because the U.S. has repeatedly vetoed a ceasefire. So we're going directly to the or else, which is campaigning to have Article 6 invoked against the U.S. To have America expelled from the United Nations. We're campaigning for consequences to be imposed. You know, the same goes for boycotting and buying local. This is moving directly to the consequences. We're not asking for anything. We aren't even issuing you a final notice. You've been having a final notice for months. So now we're shutting off your service. And, you know, I think that's what BRICS has been doing, in a sense. They're imposing the or else on America and on the West. They're decoupling, they're de-dollarizing, they're setting up their own sort of diplomatic and political order, their own economic order. You know, the global South and the Muslim world have been sending notices to America for decades, all ignored, including the final notices. So the world has moved to the consequences phase. And America is doing now, just like we used to do with our bills. You know, what's the minimum required to avoid a cutoff? But they've accrued such a bad reputation that no one wants to negotiate with them anymore. No one believes them anymore. You know, it's like those rich people living these, luxurious lives, but they're not really rich. They're just living on credit. That's America. They had a few generations of genuine dynamism and have been living on the mystique created by those generations ever since. Basically, the World War I, World War II generations, and to some extent, maybe through the Cold War period, they created a mystique about America. And they've been able to keep a sort of a running tab with the rest of the world, with everyone believing that the U.S. was good for it, that they would make it right. Everything that they owed the rest of the world, that they would make it right eventually. They would settle the tab. That all these outstanding debts that they accrued in terms of their violence and their bullying and their oppression and their exploitation, their toppling of governments, their wars, their neoliberalism, and so on, for a long time, people were willing to have a blind faith that somehow America would settle all those debts with the world based off of that mystique that they had created. But just like the victim of a romance scam, it's gradually settled in that it was all lies, that it was bait and switch from the beginning. Even those dynamic generations that created the mystique were just part of the con. America catfished the world, and we know it now, and we can't unknow it. So everyone is moving on. The game is over. It's the consequences stage now. And I think that ultimately, this is the best thing that could happen to America. It's the best thing that could happen to the West. You know how we talk about first world problems, these sort of luxury grievances and niche self-indulgent obsessions that you have in the West, whether it's, gender identity or slow internet connection, narcissistic fake allergies or what have you. The type of problems that you talk about for the sole purpose of displaying your class status. Like if you tell me that you have OCD, it's the same as you telling me that you just bought a Louis Vuitton bag or something, because you don't have OCD. If you had OCD, you wouldn't have to tell anyone. Everyone would know, because you have to, flip a light switch 37 times or something before you enter a room. But your life is so empty and your personality is so vacuous that you need to claim some sort of disorder just to make yourself seem interesting. You're the froth on your own cappuccino, floating in a sea of triviality and mediocrity. Well, the solution to first world problems is third world problems. The best way to cure yourself of fake problems is to have real problems. And America and the West are starting to have real problems now. And the whole collective West is on track towards third worldization. So that might eventually save them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating the conditions for them to be humbled and potentially repentant and potentially redeemed. And he's creating those conditions by means of the natural system of balance that he embedded in life, i.e., actions and consequences. Consequences are the guardrails that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed on either side of Sirat al-Mustaqim. So that once you veer into the consequences, it's to let you know that you've strayed from the path, so that maybe you can change direction, because without consequences, you're unlikely to ever course correct. Because as we know, the time when an entire qawm would be destroyed by divine punishment, that time is over. That period coincided with the sending of prophets. What happens now is the law of consequences, natural ordained system of balance in human affairs across time. So if you prefer, you can call it disciplinary rather than punitive, but it can't be avoided. Just as what goes up must come down, this is the physics of morality, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed it. Impunity does not exist, and whoever imagines that it does exist is only increasing the severity of their inevitable reckoning. So bringing it back to the original subject, you have to be able to impose some degree of reckoning when you make a demand. Some sort of ultimatum. You have to have an or else, otherwise no one will listen to your demand. Now, if you're a Westerner, especially if you're an American, you will imagine that or else must always mean a threat of violence, because they think like mafiosos. But obviously, when you're talking about the West, or you're talking about America, violence can almost never be your or else, because that's their favorite thing. They hope that your or else is violence, because they prefer to settle things that way. They want everything to be settled that way. That's the only thing that they're still pretty good at and that they're equipped to do. But like, again, with Article 6 campaign, this is a manifestation of a practical or else. Ceasefire now and genocide now and free Palestine now, or else we will move to have you expelled from the United Nations and your ability to veto the global consensus will be revoked. Or you can look at another example. You remember when Mohammed bin Salman called for countries to impose an arms embargo against Israel last November at the BRICS summit. Well, the or else for that is the ICJ genocide case against Israel, which puts anyone who is arming Israel in danger of prosecution in lawsuits, civil lawsuits. So now you have many countries and companies that are either completely stopping selling weapons to Israel or they're taking steps to do so. I think there was a Japanese company that stopped. I think Spain stopped. A court in Netherlands ordered the government to block the export of all parts of F-35 fighter jets. A regional government in Belgium recently suspended 2 licenses for the export of gunpowder to Israel, specifically citing concerns related to potential violations that they could be liable for. So, stop selling weapons to Israel or else. If you're not giving power a choice between either doing something or having something done to them, then they'll always have the choice to just not listen. If it's a one-sided negotiation whereby you ask and they dictate, then it's not a negotiation at all. You have to have a countermove. And if you have no countermove, then your demands are nothing but confessions of helplessness. But if you do have a countermove, and we do actually have many countermoves available to us, then I say just make your moves and let them come to you to negotiate.